À-bas-le-ciel.
I think it's fair to say, if you're looking at it in a student-centered way, people are going to learn when they want to learn and know sooner. This is true. This is a tragedy over time. But the actual problems I deal with, and the reason why I'm looking to this book for like moral support, moral support as well as hard social science research and statistics, is that, I look at a situation like, okay, so you have a university program that is ostensibly teaching people how to speak Chinese. And at the end of the program, the students can't speak Chinese. And I have data to prove this. And again, I did get peer-reviewed articles looking at this. They can't read, they can't write. You can test this. So after 4 years and tens of thousands of dollars, where, whatever it is, on a 1 to 10 scale, they're still at a 1. You know what I mean? So that's a failure. You know what I mean? And I can't say in that more philosophical sense, well, people are going to learn when they want to learn. I want to move forward to hard social science evaluations of what works and what doesn't. And when something doesn't work, it's got to be treated like a crisis. It's good because the stakes are so high. The consequences for people's whole lives are so high. I'm gonna go on a limb here and use the word prove in summing up this element of the book. I think you could say this book proves that the students are garbage. It proves that the professors are garbage. It proves that the system is garbage. Now, I could go into more depth into those. And it proves that the price is way too high. That the price is way too high, the cost is way too high, and that, of course, the student debt is garbage. And, is a problem. Right, yeah. But, and that's of all those four, I think the only one the public is comfortable talking about is the price. That's in the mainstream newspapers. People are very uncomfortable if you're actually bringing out statistics and evidence, and you're doing evidence-based research. You're doing real social science research, proving that the professors are not competent, that they are not bringing, proving that the students are not competent. I mean, it's strange to use the word competence, but that's a good way to put it, though, is that the students are not competent as students. That they are not learning, that they are not doing the work, etc. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Even if that were in the news, though, I think at one point in the book, the author, whoever was writing at the time, made this point that even if students knew the statistics of like how many students are actually learning, like 10% of students at this college are really learning, would it impact their decision to go to one school versus another?
À-bas-le-ciel.
Video is not a book review. It's a discussion of issues raised by a book. So, if you've already read the book, you'll find this video more interesting because, I think it's kind of phony. It's the same with album reviews these days. Anyone can download an album for free in 35 seconds anyway. So why pretend the purpose of the review is to recommend whether or not someone buys it or recommend whether or not someone listens to it. Anyone who's looking for an album review today in the music world is looking for some deeper discussion of the album or the issues raised by the album. In the same way, this is a discussion of the book, including why it matters to us, why we read it, what we got out of it, and so on. The book is called Academically Adrift. So I am someone who's now spent a large percentage of my life in universities, plural. At the moment, I am both a university professor and a university student with no PhD. And it looks like in the next 10 years, I'm going to be spending a lot of time in universities to get a PhD, which I'm not thrilled about. Like, I'm not some, naive person who thinks this is going to be great. I'm divorced. This is my new girlfriend. I'm not divorced from her. But, my ex-wife was a university professor. And hilariously, for one period of time in my life, actually, we were breaking the university rules. I was married to a professor, and I was a student at the same university. So that was, strictly speaking, illegal. Now, why do I mention this? Again, it would be very vague for me to just say I've spent a lot of time in universities, plural. I've spent time in universities in Asia. I've spent time in universities in Europe. I've spent time in quite a few different universities within Canada. None in the United States, I just mentioned. And I've spent time in universities that were elite, like namely Cambridge and Oxford in England. It's about as elite as it gets. Elite universities within Taiwan also, for example. But I've also spent time in and involved with not elite, small, local, low status universities, however you want to put it, right? So I've seen a lot of the diversity. I've spent a lot of time with professors, amongst professors, eating dinner with professors. Not just when my wife was a professor, I was meeting them as friends, but also just because now as an older student, going back, I go out to dinner with, a lot of them talk to me as a friend, a lot of them talk to me as an equal. Not all, some of them hate me, different strokes. But I see it from the professor's perspective. I also still am a student. I still am very much struggling with the issues a student struggles with at this age. So I came to this book. Why did I read Academically Adrift in the first place? I guess I can say now for decades, the profound cracks in the edifice of Western academia have been very obvious to me. And it's just astonishing that nobody seems to want to take it seriously. Nobody wants to recognize and address those problems, let alone ameliorate them, let alone solve them or improve them. And again, I have actually sat at meetings with professors, with a professor and a dean and an ombudsman present. We are trying to address what's broken. Sometimes I've actually been involved in the kind of bargaining and negotiating process as a student or as someone connected to the professors or what have you. And sometimes, I've sat there just powerless. I've sat there just feeling powerless and hopeless at how unbelievably awful the actual content of education was in my country, in Canada. Now, Melissa is much younger than I am.
Yeah, I don't have as much experience as you do with university, but I do have a 4-year degree from an elite university in the United States.
No, but this is also what's interesting. In terms of when we come together as relationship, we're at the same bridge. So we've both completed a BA, right?
Yeah.
And we're both looking at going back and getting an MA and other options like that, right? We're both at that bridge. Yeah. Anyway, my story's a lot longer, you know what I mean? Yeah. I studied a number of different languages in a number of different universities all over the world, etc. And your experience is at one university in the United States. And I think it is fair to call it an elite university. It's a prestigious university in any case. Now, just to give one talking point from the book, the statistics, of course, are complex and detailed. You can get the precise stats. But broadly speaking, one of the findings is that about 90% of the students learn nothing. Now, how do you define nothing? They learn remarkably little, about 90%. And there are about 10% of the students who really are learning, who really are making progress, who really are improving in the areas measured by what's called the CLA, College Learning Assessment, which is their primary source of data, their primary research instrument is this survey called the CLA. I think for both you and I that basically rings true. Obviously 90% versus 10%, again, it's not exact, and it's not going to be the same in your intro to German class and your intro to anthropology class. And if you study architecture and if you study medicine, of course it's going to shift. But still, broadly speaking, for you at your university and me at mine, that rings true.
And another thing that rang true is that people are going through university to get a degree, to get a certificate. And they will do what they have to pass the classes and get through it, but they're not going to go out of their way to meet the professor outside of class, to study other things that are mentioned, not on the required readings, but on the recommended readings.
Right.
The recommended readings are basically thrown aside by most students.
Yes.
But that's I think that rang true. Definitely, seeing that most students weren't committed to learning. They were committed to getting a degree and getting through college. Yeah,
and they put quite a lot of emphasis on socialization too.
Oh, yeah.
So I clipped it. So I do want to come back to the issue you just raised, but I clipped a pie chart out of the book here where they have, of the students' total available hours, they had 51% of those hours being spent socializing, recreating, etc. 51% of the time. And that's not 51% of waking hours. That's 51% of all of the hours in the week. Because sleeping is 24%. So 24% is sleeping, 51% is socializing, and indeed, at first I thought, oh well, what about working? Because the book also deals with the phenomenon of university students having part-time jobs. Only 9% of the time is working and volunteering, etc. There's some other things in that, but then 9% attending classes and 7% for studying. So much more time socializing than any other category of activity mentioned for students, and remarkably little interest in actually doing the reading.
Yeah, I won't say that that was my experience, but I
Right.
think that was the experience of most of the friends that I had,
Right.
most of the other students that I talked with. That was their experience.
And
like,
this is obviously looking at averages. I mean, obviously we're looking,
Yeah.
we're looking at data from,
Yeah, but it is also interesting to note because the 4-year degree that I got was at a place where most people lived on campus. It wasn't a commuter school. I did take classes at a school in Detroit for on and off for like 2.5 years, and that was mostly a commuter school.
Yeah.
And it is interesting to see how different the social lives are
Right.
of the students that go to that school versus the
Right.
school that I went to. Yeah.
Well, okay, as a general philosophical principle, I mean, I don't really want to center this on the student rather than the institution, but it's true. If you're taking a student-centered approach to this analysis, you have to say people learn when they want to learn and no sooner. If your students don't want to learn, they're not going to learn, and that's about it.
Yeah, and part of it is motivating them to want to learn. Of course, you can't, you can lead somebody to water. You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. But I think a big part of that is having a professor that encourages students to want to be interested in a subject, or at least gives them some kind of
Yeah, I can flip that around though and just say, but are the students in the right subject? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Why? That's another way to look at it. So I mean, the motivations is complex. What I was going to say, this is also why I don't want to approach it in a student-centered way. What I'm really interested in looking at is the institution. What's wrong with the institution? How is the teaching done? Yeah. There are a lot of important questions about student motivation and do they want to learn, and why are they there? Are they taking the right course? Are they in pathways of learning? That's the term used in the book. Are they on career paths that can even lead to the outcomes they want?
Right,
right. Can this even lead to employment? Those are student-centered questions that are really important.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they're very distinct from questions of institutional capacity, professorial competence, etc. Yeah?
Right. So, another thing that I wanted to mention is that, based on the title, you would think that it was going to be an exposition on how people start college without knowing what they want to go into.
Yes.
And they're adrift, they can't choose, they can't put their thumb on what they actually want to pursue. That wasn't the main point of it. But
Right.
I think for me, that was my experience with, I started off hoping to double major in biology and English with, this was before I actually started college. I had vague aspirations of becoming a medical doctor or getting involved in the medical field in some way. But once I actually got to university and saw all of the requirements and started to complete the requirements or try to complete the requirements, became clear pretty quickly that I wasn't fully aware of what was required and not even what was required, but what was beneficial to getting into medical school. There's a lot of extracurricular things that you can do, or that basically you have to do to get into elite schools. And this book does mention that students will in high school have these aspirations I want to be a lawyer, be a doctor, and they don't really know how many years and how much effort you have to put into it.
Okay, but just pause. But that too is an area where these institutions are, in the parlance of our times, bullshitting.
Yes.
So we've just been through this even a little bit in this relationship, but I have decades of experience with this. So, you talk about extracurricular activities being required to get this. So in the field of Buddhist philosophy, do I have sufficient or, way more than sufficient extracurricular and volunteer experience to get into an elite school in Buddhist philosophy? So I just meant you guys don't know my background if you watch this video, but I have more than a decade of experience. I went to Sri Lanka. I met Bhikkhu Bodhi. I stayed in the same Buddhist temple Bhikkhu Bodhi used to stay in Sri Lanka. I met Bhikkhu Bodhi in the United States of America. I've done this Buddhist philosophy thing in elite universities in Europe and in elite Buddhist temples in Asia. I've traveled. I've learned the languages. I've even published peer-reviewed articles without having an MA or a PhD yet. And when I'm looking to apply to a lowly MA, so I would just say it's also interesting, this kind of thing. Well, you can't bullshit me. I've got all of these requirements and more, and I can't get ahead in that field. Now, why? There are a lot of reasons why. There's a lot of reasons, but also there's this haze, it is a haze of academic freedom, where academic freedom is a smokescreen for, I think, institutional incompetence. Now the reality is professors are deeply prejudicial people. They're human beings. I mean, I can make excuses to them to some extent, but professors have religious beliefs. Buddhist philosophy is a religious area. You know, like we could get into all that. There were religious and political concerns. And so my first diploma was in political science. You think it doesn't matter that I'm an anti-communist? I'm basically pro-democracy and against communism. You think that doesn't matter in a department of political science if the professor making the decision is themselves a far left-winger or a communist? So I'm doing politics of China. And one of the professors at University of Victoria is an active Communist Party member now, supporting the Communist Party. You think that doesn't matter? Like, what do you think matters more? My record of volunteer and humanitarian work or my political position in contrast? So...
Yeah, that is a huge difference between liberal arts and the sciences. So, and what I was going to say about the sciences...
Maybe.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Maybe these problems cut pretty deep and cut pretty wide, but go on, yeah.
Yeah, but what I was going to say...
I just raised that question.
Because I had mentioned, it's partly falls on the professor to motivate and encourage students to actually care about the subject. That's debatable. But what I was going to say is that's a lot different between science versus liberal arts, at least in my experience. In science, like how passionate can you really be about physics? At least when I was taking it, it was like, okay, I'm just doing this because this is a requirement to get into medical school. And I had no attachment to it. It was just something that I had to complete. Whereas when I was taking certain literature classes, I was like, okay, this is interesting to me. And if the professor was interested in the subject as well, like that motivated me to want to produce good work and, be able to talk about something with other people in the class who are also interested in the subject. And, at least in my experience, literature and science, like it's very different that way.
Of course. Well, look, so this brings me back to what I wanted to comment on before. You used this term of basically how high are the professors' expectations, that the professors having higher expectations is significant for the students performing better or learning more, having better test results. Now, why is that a major issue in this book? It's because the book's line of reasoning begins from data. So just point this out. It turns out when they look at the stats, when they look at the data, that higher expectations on the part of the professor actually does correlate to better outcomes for students. So I'm just pointing that out. It's not a philosophical argument. Now, another example of that, something you might not think is significant or interesting, is that the data indicates that more time studying alone, emphasis on the word alone, equates to higher outcomes, higher performance on the CLA, these quantitative measures, more improvement, more learning, okay? Studying in groups does not.
Right.
Group studying, social studying, whatever you want to say, studying with other students actually equates to lower outcomes, to learning less or forgetting more, whatever it is, negative learning. So I just mentioned those are the kinds of issues. This is the advantage and disadvantage of having a kind of data-first approach. You're starting from the data. You're saying, what does the data teach us? And it does teach us, for example, that professors having high expectations is positive important. Now, almost the only other thing in that list, I have the list here, but there aren't that many hard conclusions from the data. But yeah, I think the only other thing on the list of what the data shows us is about the quantity of reading and writing that students do. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, but what I was going to say, I agree with with the results that they found, that studying alone results in better learning. And in the sciences particularly, studying in groups was encouraged. It was it was the norm. Like, when I was having difficulty in physics and organic chemistry, I joined study groups. So this is like 2 hours after, outside of class, that you would sit down with a graduate student instructor, and everybody would come in with like the questions that they had from the homework. And it was basically doing everything that a class should have done, but because the lectures were enormous and like 500 students or something, like how can you address any of these problems? So like study groups were really emphasized, like if you want to do well in this class, you should join a study group. And coming from somebody that doesn't really want to be doing physics at all, like I needed even more. Like I needed even more than the study group. I should have had a tutor or something. But anyway, turns out I just I didn't end up going into medical science. But so yeah, that was what I was going to say. Like I did have the best results when I actually was able to study alone. But the problem was with math and science, sometimes like if you're studying the wrong thing, you're screwed. Like,
but even more extreme with language education.
Yeah.
Can you learn Chinese alone? can you learn Chinese without talking to someone who's a native speaker, or at least much more advanced as a student? That's also a question. Yeah. So I think proceeding from the data that way, though, you do get a cart before the horse or a chicken and egg problem sometimes. I think one that's a totally vacuous stat that way. So this question of studying alone, like, if you're competent enough in the subject, then you can study alone productively, right? But if you're not, so like physics, you may not be at a high enough level in physics that you can study alone yet, so you need tutoring or some kind of social form study. So that's also, you get a cart before the horse, a bit of a chicken and egg thing.
Right. Whereas literature,
but another one
was studying alone.
For you it was. Yeah. If English is your second language, it isn't. Maybe if you're a Pakistani immigrant getting a degree in English literature, it wouldn't be. So I think, but anyway, I think another really striking example of that, where the stat is vacuous, they make a big deal out of the stats connected to how often you contact the professor outside of class.
Yeah.
But again, to me, it's like, well, okay, so implicitly, this is, you can't mix up the chicken and the egg or the cart before the horse here. If you're a really strong student, professors want to chit-chat with you, and maybe vice versa, you want to chit-chat with professors. But this doesn't really mean that there's any educational value to the chit-chatting with professors, or, you know what I mean? So this is the kind of problem you get into with an approach that leads with the data. But obviously the whole strength of this is that it brings to an ongoing political debate about what's wrong with American universities and Canadian universities, I may add. It brings to it quantitative measures. It brings to it a real data point.
Yeah. I thought it was good when a class required actually meeting with your professor one-on-one. But that was only the smaller classes that I had. Like 40 students was the smallest class I think I had. And I don't even think that the professors who were teaching classes of 400 students had like regular office hours. If they did, like, how could you?
How many students can you meet with?
Yeah. So anyway, but you were saying like the one requirement that they got to was 40 hours of reading per week and 20 hours of writing per semester. I think
it was in pages. I think the amount of writing was in pages.
Oh, what did I say? 20 hours?
Yeah. But anyway,
20 pages. I meant 20 pages.
Sure. Yeah. So many pages of reading and so many pages of writing per course. Well, okay. This brings me to one of the topics I want to talk about, though. I'm deeply concerned about the readings being assigned being garbage. That's my concern. Yeah. So, it's one thing. Obviously, this is a kind of very crude metric. Are you doing 40 pages of reading in the whole course? If you're doing less than that, maybe it's a bad indication, and that shows up as statistically significant. Yes. In the early part of the book, the first chapter or two is a bit more philosophical, and then we just get into a kind of statistic by statistic exposition of what the study proves. But in the early, more philosophical part, we do get reflections on the changing role of the professor himself or herself, of the changing nature of the professorate. And you and I have both encountered this and struggled with this. Many of these courses are designed to be self-indulgent for the professor, simply to indulge the narrow research interests of the professor, with no concern for what would be useful to the students, with no concern even of what's useful to the field or the discipline, like what will prepare you. So I'll stick with Buddhist studies as one example. I've been involved in a number of different fields, but it's one thing to design a course and say, look, I'm going to prepare these students so they can have a future as a researcher in the social sciences, or I'm going to design this course so that we really get a survey of the history of Asia, so that you know enough about the last 1,000 years in Japan, Korea, China, India. You make a list. So this is the competence you're going to gain, so you're prepared to move forward in this field, or you're prepared to move forward in several fields, like maybe Asian studies, history, etc., what have you. There's a difference between that. And so again, I'm not, terms like student-centered can be misleading. I'm not talking about amusing the students. I'm talking about delighting the students. I'm not talking about designing the course in a way that's gonna make students happy. Maybe students are miserable learning the history of India, but you say, look, guess what, guys? If you want to do Buddhist studies, you've got to know 1,000 years of history of India. Right. Actually, you got to know 2,500 years of history. But anyway, 3,000 would help.
And if you finish this degree, you should have a competency of the last 1,000 years of Asian history.
Whatever it is. And again, you can imagine very easily what I've said. It could apply to English literature very easily too.
Yeah, it could apply to.
But this is completely different from. This professor did his or her thesis on this. This professor is doing his or her thesis in one specialized area. that may be of no interest to the students, may be of no utility to the students, may not prepare them for any kind of work or research in the future. It doesn't deliver any competence. It's just what that professor is obsessed with, or what that professor gets research funding with, what that professor deploys his or her graduate students to do for the research on. Now, if this doesn't sound familiar to you, you haven't been spending much time in universities lately, because this is completely endemic. I had a course that was supposed to be a survey course. It was something like, Asian Studies 301. It's supposed to be introducing the field. And it was the assigned readings, which I did and nobody else did. I mean, because I talked to the other students. I mean, I really did talk to them. There weren't that many students in the class. I talked to them and got, but they really just reflected the totally eccentric, totally self-centered, self-indulgent obsessions of that professor, which included, by the way, some obscure islands in Polynesia. Now, look, some parts of Asia may not interest me. Like, okay, so for example, if you're in Asian studies and your real interest is Buddhism, maybe you're not that interested in Saudi Arabia. But Saudi Arabia is a really important country for understanding what's happening in all of Asia, politically, economically, historically. You got to know the history of Islam. You can't know the history of Buddhism without knowing the history of Islam. I'm being 100% sincere in that. If you want to have competence in Buddhism, you need a certain level of competence in Islam. That's completely justified. However, there are some islands in Polynesia that do not contribute to your knowledge of anything else in any useful way in this. We're talking about remote islands in Polynesia, like islands that had no contact with any other society for centuries, really. You know what I mean? They only had contact with a couple of other remote Polynesian islands. They don't help you with the history of China or the history of Japan, let alone India or whatever. But just because it's this professor's obsession, we're being handed the most ludicrously left-wing communist theses on agriculture on those islands. So it's like an incoherent rant about how Lenin's theory of agriculture isn't appreciated enough in the context of like how Polynesian islands first appropriated chicken raising technology. I am not joking. And you're paying tens of thousands of dollars to study this. Yeah. I did the reading. Nobody else did. How do you expect a student, maybe he's 19 years old, maybe he's 21, maybe he's 23, whatever. You expect a student to sit down and be like, yeah, I'm going to read this. This is about communism, Lenin's theory of agriculture, and chickens in Polynesia. It has no relevance to his interests, has no relevance to his life as a student, and it does not in any way build competence. So again, I'm saying this clearly. I'm not arguing that professors need to cater to the amusing the students, to cater to their interest in that sense. But curriculum, if you just think about the meaning of the word curriculum,
yeah.
You know what I mean? What is the curriculum here? Very often, even if you're looking at a course that has 40 pages of assigned reading, or 80 pages, or 120 pages, I think many cases the students are justified in refusing to do that reading.
Right. Yeah, so when I was focusing mainly on getting the English degree, I was taking 12 credits, so it was basically like 3 classes with 4 credits each, and it was all literature classes. So I had a lot of reading each week. Yeah. So, in some ways I'm biased to think like this requirement is good. 40 pages of reading a week, that seems definitely doable and like the minimum that a university student should be doing. Because I was doing like 3 times that at least per week. So yeah, but we were saying like I have like 2 different examples of you're talking about like curriculum, like it should prepare you. It should have like for English literature, yeah, right. I should have a competency about the history of English literature. Right. And so like yes, there was a rubric basically for what we had to do. So like I had to take some classes pre-1600s English literature, and then through the 1800s, and then up through, and there was requirements for American literature. And I did take 2 classes with this one professor because I was interested in what he was interested in. But it was, like you say, a pet project of the professor, and it was what he was basically obsessed with. So one of them was about diaspora, so like tales or story books that were about people of different races that had to move, and like just like pretty depressing topics, but to me it was really interesting. Like and the other one was about intergenerational memory. So like the memories of this abuse that would happen, to different races and ethnicities in the past, and like how this transformed literature in some way. And to me, like the books are really interesting. Like I read Go Down Moses by William Faulkner, and that was like a really interesting examination of African Americans and Native Americans in America throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s. One was like really brutal about a family that had been slaves, and their transformation to into a society that was not slave owning, but was still, dealing with all these repercussions of slavery. That one was called Corregidora. And then another one that is important to me is called Love Medicine. And that's mostly about like Native American history throughout, from like the 1950s up to like the 1990s. So like those were all interesting to me, and I liked what the professor was talking about, and
right.
I was really motivated to like write interesting essays and
but you
give
can
it my
still
own.
recognize the design of the course is just the idiosyncratic research interest of the professor,
Yeah.
and has nothing to do with you, and has nothing to do with
Yes.
academic excellence or preparation for any kind of job or competence in a field. Right.
Yeah. There were a lot of other interesting books in those. That I could mention, but
but I mean, look, to summarize that, even when the system works, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
On the narrow issue of reading, I mean, we could talk about. Well, I guess this is both reading and writing. I think there's also an assumption here that the reading you do as a university student is the assigned reading for the course.
Mm-hmm.
So I just went through a couple of years at University of Victoria, and from the very first week of classes, I was going to the library and getting out the books I needed to write the essays, which are not the required readings.
Right.
So I would just say for some of my courses, I was interested in the required readings. I had no time for them. All of the time I had was doing original research that was, thematically related to what the course was about. So to give an example, history and politics of China. But I could not spend the time reading the textbook, even if I was interested in the text. I could not spend that time because I had to go and read a bunch of different books to write an essay. And your essay couldn't be based on the textbook. You know what I mean? Of course, it would be, even if you did, it would be terrible. You know what I mean? You can't write the essay based on the textbook. So that's also a question of what you're reading. Now, I'm an older student. I already had a bachelor's degree in political science, so I was really prepared for that. That's why I did it from the first week. I mean, obviously, other students probably wait a month and then get out the books then. But from the first week of class, I was going to the library and taking out books that were not the assigned reading. I was doing non-assigned readings because I was looking at the syllabus and saying, okay, 2 months from now, I got to produce an essay on this topic. So, on a topic of my choosing.
Such a good student.
Well, am I though?
Yeah.
Am I?
That's what students should be doing, but they are.
No, but I'm pointing out. I'm being self-critical here. Because I'm not doing the required reading. I'm not. You see, I'm not doing the required.
The point
I'm producing great essays.
Right.
I am producing great essays because that's already what I'm good at.
That's the point of what the class is. Like you're going to have to do research and write an essay. Like.
Yeah,
you are so advanced in like most of the information that would be in the required readings that maybe for other students.
No, honestly, still I regret that because like some of the courses about Mao Zedong, Cultural Revolution, modern communism in China. I wish now that I have time, I wish I could read the textbooks. I wish I could even read my handwritten notes from class. I wish I could do the required readings. I couldn't do it. I didn't have time. That was partly because of the pressure of writing all the essays, partly because I was in a special accelerated program where I was doing all 400 level courses. Like everything was 400, 300 level. I had no lower level, so the workload was really bad. And it's probably because of language learning, which is a subject for another video, but because I was learning Chinese while I was in college, and then I was learning Japanese while I was in college, I had no time for anything. Yeah. But that was also going to say, when I look at this pie chart of how much time students spend studying, so basically, just to get so students spent an average of 15 hours per week in class of any kind. So classes, labs, tutorials, about 15 hours per week in classes of any kind. And then they spent less than that on all forms of studying. So studying here includes writing essays, maybe. So 15 hours a week,
so
and then less than that, right? So then less than that with the reading and writing and studying, because it's not necessarily studying for a test. It could be writing an essay, what have you, right? Now, the thing is, not only does that ring true for me in terms of what other students were doing, like for every 1 hour in class, they were spending less than 1 hour in outside of class work. That I think is true of the majority of the students that are around me at all these different universities. Not the exceptional elite, but the majority. I think that's true of as a thing. But I have to say, that was even true of me as a ratio for my time for the classes other than the language class. Because I had a period of time, I've talked about this where I was waking up at like 5:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. to study Chinese before I was just absolutely, that's why I gained so much weight. I got fat. I was absolutely killing myself trying to put in the hours to study Chinese at this impossible pace. And it was killing me. But that did not leave time for other classes. So I'm just saying, like, my point is not to say I'm a nice guy. My point is, when I'm looking at this, I can really easily remember how I also managed my class time and got high grades with similar amount of time being spent on classes. Even though it wasn't in my case because I was going out and partying. I didn't have 50.
You weren't socializing 50% of the time.
No, I wasn't spending 51% of the time getting drunk. I was spending 51% of my time studying Chinese or Japanese and applying for jobs and applying for internships, you know, and doing other crap like that, you know, related to university and looking for master's degrees and PhD programs and other pious stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that is based on averages.
Of course.
You know, from my experience.
It's an average.
Like, or
right.
Just, you know, from the students that I know, there was more time than what they, you know, suggest, like 7% of the time to get through the projects and through the homework that was assigned.
Sure,
but a lot of my friends are engineers. It's like you have to do like computing.
Right.
You have to make a program.
Right,
you know
but
I mean?
you were at an above average university.
Yeah.
You know, you were at an elite university,
That's
and you
true.
were probably talking to above average people.
Yeah,
you know?
and versus when I went to that other, went to the school in downtown Detroit, like. I doubt, Right. I think it is probably on par with that.
Right.
So, you can see the differences in caliber.
And there's a big difference between studying architecture and studying theater. I mean, you know, so it's an average, but to me, I think that does ring true. I want to come back also to this 90 versus 10% thing, 90% versus 10% thing, because I got to tell you, I've been in individual courses that were better than that, where it was more than 10% of students who were really making advances who were substantively learning and who were improving their skills, whether it's reading skills, writing skills. I have been in classes that have been better than that, but I have also been in a lot of classes that were worse than that, where it's fewer than 10% are getting anything out of the course, are learning anything whatsoever. I've just come out of an Asian Studies department where very often in the class, even in the high, and again, I was having to do all 400 level classes, you know, with a few exceptions, it was in this peculiar program. Even in the high level classes, it's like, when I really think about it in that whole class, are there 2 or 3 people who are learning something, who have any interest, who have any engagement, you know what I mean? And large number of students, thanks to the laptop computer, I can see for a fact they're on Facebook during class. I can see for a fact they're doing clothes shopping during class. Yeah, like you when you're doing clothes shopping on a laptop, you got to think about, will these jeans fit me? Like, I know, like, that's a pretty high stress activity actually. Buying clothes online, you are paying zero attention to the professor.
I think I mentioned to you I took a philosophy class on logic, and in one of those classes, like, one student was checking the stock market every single time. Like, he was playing the stock market just in class. Obviously a business major or something, but yeah, I thought that was a particularly funny example. But yeah, I saw that definitely. Facebook, all social media, shopping. I think that's really common. But you know, it's hard to tell with the number of students I had in my classes. Like, you know, I felt like I learned a lot in the psychopathology class I took. So I just was, you know, mostly out of just interest in the subject, learning about the different kinds of mental disorders, and you know, I wasn't majoring in psychology, and it wasn't a required course, but it wasn't like a 500 student lecture. It wasn't enormous, but it was like probably 300 or maybe 250, and it's like, how do you really know? I mean, I don't know, like,
Well, okay.
And I didn't socialize much with people.
Right, so you're in a different position from me. A class of 250 students, you would know. But I would just say, when I'm making these generalizations, I'm often talking about a class of 20 students. And I talk to 18 of them at length.
Right.
You know what I mean? But in many cases, I talk to all 20. I just say, in many of my classes, I really met and spoke with every single student. So I just mentioned.
It's a lot different because, like, when you walk in, you know, if the professor isn't there yet, you can be like, so what'd you think of the reading? Or like, did you do the reading?
Very often those.
Most of the time.
That's right. That's exactly how we know.
I didn't do the reading. What was it about? You know?
Right. No, those are exactly the sources of information I have as a student with that perspective. And as I say, in other situations, I've had the perspective of a professor. I'm gonna go on a limb here and use the word prove in summing up this element of the book. I think you could say this book proves that the students are garbage. It proves that the professors are garbage. It proves that the system is garbage. Now, I could go into more depth into those. And it proves that the price is way too high. That the price is way too high, the cost is way too high, and that, of course, the student debt is garbage. And, you know, is a problem. Right, yeah. But, you know, and that's of all those four, I think the only one the public is comfortable talking about is the price. You know, that's in the mainstream newspapers. People are very uncomfortable if you're actually bringing out statistics and evidence, and, you know, you're doing evidence-based research. You're doing real social science research, proving that the professors are not competent, that they are not bringing, you know, proving that the students are not competent. I mean, you know, it's strange to use the word competence, but that's a good way to put it, though, is that the students are not competent as students. That they are not learning, that they are not doing the work, etc. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Even if that were in the news, though, I think at one point in the book, the author, whoever was writing at the time, made this point that even if students knew the statistics of like how many students are actually learning, like 10% of students at this college are really learning, would it impact their decision to go to one school versus another? Like what really, like for you, I think yes, definitely. And for me, yes, definitely. But like, I think a lot of students are swayed by sports facilities, like whether the team is good and in basketball or football.
So this brings us, I think, to the thesis or the meta thesis of the book as a whole, which is that what do they blame for this fundamentally? They blame a shift to a clientelistic relationship, that a free market ideology has in a profound and subtle way changed the behavior of everyone, especially the behavior of students, maybe the behavior of students more than professors, that, you know, this is a fee-for-service relationship between a client and basically like an entertainment complex. I mean, really, that's a blunt but honest summary of it. That the universities are offering a kind of lifestyle that has a great deal to do with sports and recreation and getting drunk and probably sex. And they don't talk about sex that much, actually. There's actually very little about sex. But, you know, it's offering a kind of 4-year vacation almost in a particular type of aspect, and a credential. That's also a big thing. They talk about credentialism, and that students approach that looking to do the minimum amount of effort in order to get that credential. And then they also have these other agendas in terms of
maximum amount of socialization, maximum amount of partying,
or maybe a maximum amount of sports, or a few other things.
I'm not saying that this about every college student. And
no, but we're saying it about 90% of college students. No. But I mean, that's the whole point of data, is to go beyond just saying, well, this is only a problem for some college students. It's a problem for the vast majority. It is definitely a problem for more than 50% of college students, right? And now the influences on professors' behavior, again, that's really early in the book. For some reason, it's the early, more philosophical chapter where they deal with that. But they look at what are the motivations for professors' behavior, and the fact that professors are not really concerned with helping students. They're not concerned with outcomes. They're not concerned with whether or not the students learn anything. And what they are concerned with includes their personal research. You know, like, they don't make out these professors as vampires or parasites. You know, they do kind of map out all the different, they have to deal with faculty meetings, they have to deal with their own research.
Student evaluations. They care about student evaluations.
They care about student evaluations.
Getting positive reviews basically from students. Like, there's ratemyprofessors.com now.
Right. The professors have an interest in giving high grades to students who don't deserve them. It gets into all of that too. But this kind of behavioral analysis. But their meta thesis, as I say, is that this is more than merely a commercialization, this clientelization, this free market reform that happened almost invisibly within universities. Universities still have the same outward appearance of ancient institutions, but they're not. That's been undermined in a profound sense. Yeah. this is true in some ways and not others, because I can still ask, why can't I get a PhD in Buddhist philosophy? Why can't I get ahead in political science? I mean, there are actually still ideological I mean, I just say, even that little anecdote I gave where it's like, well, it matters more that the professor is a communist, or it matters more that the professor is a true believer in some bizarre form of Buddhism from Japan or England. I know examples of this, you know what I mean? Like, their ideological and religious beliefs may actually matter more than all of these problems, as profound as they are. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I have nothing to say in response. It's just an interesting problem.
Yeah.
How to get. I don't know.
And the recommendations are weak. I mean, where do we go from here? Yes, the recommendation that we need more research is strong. The recommendation that we need to bring into universities hard, objective analysis of what's going right, measurements of outcomes. That's the fundamental thing, that we have to bring in tests like the CLA. I mean, I think it's worth mentioning briefly what the CLA does. The CLA measures student competence. It's not like an IQ test. It includes things like presenting the students with a variety of short articles, short sources of information, having them read them in an analytical way, and then come up with recommendations, write up a short opinion piece or summary or set of conclusions, and so on. So your competence in doing research and writing and so-called critical thinking, if you want to use the term critical thinking,
analysis,
sure.
Being able to make something out of all that information.
Right. Which is, it's not a specific job skill, but this is something that students should be acquiring as an ability, should be improving in during 4 years across all disciplines, basically. Even if you work in the sciences, so one of their examples is doing this with aircraft safety, where there's a report about airplane crashes, and then you read these different short articles, and then you have to write up your recommendations. You imagine you're working for a firm that has to decide what kind of aircraft to buy, or what the implications of this research is about aircraft safety. So that's something someone in the sciences should be able to do, someone in English literature should be able to do, and they should be able to do better and better during those 4 years, and then at the end of their graduation, they should be able to do much better than at the beginning. And basically what the study showed is 90% of the students don't improve at all, and that overall, in the first 2 years, there's almost zero appreciable growth in those so-called critical thinking abilities. I mean, I don't like this term critical thinking. Again, I think it's a bit of a smokescreen. You know what I mean? But but that description, what I've just described, is just more useful than critical thinking. That's the type of activity, that's the type of research ability, the type of competence you're looking at evaluating. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fundamental problem with priority, is that the priority is socialization and not really learning. And I don't know where that starts. It obviously doesn't start in college. Right. Throughout high school too. I think that is many students' goals.
Well,
and yeah, I don't know if it's really just the fact that in general only 10% of people will get through college and really learn something. If that's just a fact, or if what can be improved, I don't know.
I said before, people will learn when they want to learn.
Yeah.
And no sooner.
Yeah, and also think of the general age bracket. I started college when I was 17. It's I know for you, you and me, we care about learning, and you more so than when we first started university, comparing you and I think you really did care more about learning than I did. I was going to college because that's just what you do, and yeah, it's also an interesting question. Should everybody be going to college?
Yes. Right.
And that is what policy is leading towards.
And everyone getting into $50,000 in debt, apparently. Huge amounts of debt. Yeah. Go on.
Yeah, they mentioned a policy that Obama was. I don't know if it was a policy that he passed or something, but they mentioned that now college is the new high school degree, and that's totally true. I feel like with an English degree, I am at the very base level.
Yes.
Getting a semi-professional job, not working at a Jimmy Don's or something. I can.
But even that is a struggle. A BA in English literature sort of entitles you to nothing in today's society, which is a kind of a tragedy for a separate video. I think it's fair to say, if you're looking at it in a student-centered way, people are going to learn when they want to learn and know sooner. This is true. This is a tragedy over times. But the actual problems I deal with, and the reason why I'm looking to this book for like moral support, moral support as well as hard social science research and statistics, is that, you know, I look at a situation like, okay, so you have a university program that is ostensibly teaching people how to speak Chinese. And at the end of the program, the students can't speak Chinese. And I have data to prove this. And again, I did get peer-reviewed articles looking at this. They can't read, they can't write. You know, you can test this. So after 4 years and tens of thousands of dollars, where, you know, whatever it is, on a 1 to 10 scale, they're still at a 1. You know what I mean? So that's a failure. You know what I mean? And I can't say in that more philosophical sense, well, people are going to learn when they want to learn. No, these students paid you money to have an organized program that would teach them the Chinese language. And in an Asian studies program, they should also learn something about the history and politics and geography of Asia. You know what I mean? Like, you got to learn some geography. You got to know where things are in Asia. You know what I mean? There may be something about literature and culture. You know what I mean? There's a lot packaged into that beyond language. But the core function of that education, which may be tens of thousands of dollars and years of your life you never get back, was to learn Chinese. And these students made that choice. They made that commitment. They put that trust in your hands. They said, "Mister, you're the expert. You teach me Chinese. You decide how it's done. I'm not going to decide what are the educational methods. That's your responsibility. I'm giving you the money. I'm sitting down in this chair. I'm giving you some of the most vital years of my life."
Right.
And at the end of it, I'm supposed to be able to speak Chinese. And they can't. It's a failure. And I have sat there in the boardroom. Again, most students would never do that. They wouldn't have the confidence. I've taken a complaint forward with the ombudsman and the dean and the head of the department and confronted with the fact your language program is a failure as an objective fact. What are we going to do now? Can't we do and I had practical suggestions for how to improve it. When something's really a disaster, it's easy to improve. You know, there were things that wouldn't have cost any money that could have improved it. And I saw the total paralysis of that department, their inability to improve it. That department is now in receivership. All the professors hate each other. They can't cooperate on anything. You know, there are other reasons why it's a disaster, even beyond just the language program, right? So I just say, philosophically, and in terms of advice I might give to my own daughter or my own cousins or something, yes, it's easy to put emphasis on the students, say, well, people learn when they want to learn. And maybe 90% of the students in college don't want to be in college, or don't know why they're there, or they're in the wrong major, which is a great tragedy. Like, you know, because it fucks up the whole rest of your life. Like, maybe you were in English literature and you shouldn't have been in English literature. And there are other people who, you know, they're in some other subject and it's really the wrong subject for them, but they didn't think it through or they didn't know what their options were. You know, that whole story. Okay, fine. But I want to move forward to hard social science evaluations of what works and what doesn't. And when something doesn't work, it's got to be treated like a crisis. Because the stakes are so high. The consequences for people's whole lives are so high. And, you know, maybe it's so ironic because at University of Victoria we had a great department of educational methods, basically of educational philosophy. You know, they had those specialized people who do these really sophisticated things where they sit down and deal with the difference between task-based learning and lecture-based learning and stuff. So yeah, well, guess what? Maybe having 40 students sit at little square desks in a grid, maybe that does not work for teaching Chinese. Maybe it works for teaching Latin and ancient Greek and not Chinese. Maybe. I don't even know if it works for Latin and Greek. Maybe that's also, you know, really ineffective. It's a separate question. But, you know, it's like, okay, so I know this doesn't work, you know. How do you teach archery? How do you teach someone how to play the guitar? You know, these are fundamentally different challenges, you know, but we just have a fetishized cultural notion of professors standing there and giving lectures on philosophy, professors standing there giving lectures on their own research interests. That's the poison at the heart of that system. I'm sorry to say it, but it is. If professors want to give research if they want to present papers on their own research interests, if they want to present their own philosophy, do that at a conference with other specialists. That's where you should do that, is at academic conferences. Do that at colloquia and symposia everywhere. Don't do it to a captive audience of 18-year-olds who can't question it, who can't use it, for whom it's wildly irrelevant to their interests, even within the program, where it doesn't confer any. But that is the fetish.
And also who probably can't make these complaints to the ombudsman like you did, you know, like you were in a position that you were older and more mature and able to make these complaints.
Yes.
Whereas students that are 18 to 21 don't.
Right. And even for me, it was emotionally hard. It was emotionally hard. Yeah. Facing up to authority figures and doing that. It was hard for me for other reasons. Not that I was afraid of the professors, but yeah, it was emotionally hard.
To be fair, I do think that the program that I did gave me an overview of English literature.
Yes.
I think it was effective at that, but it wasn't effective at preparing me for a career or for anything past that, other than a master's degree in English, which...
Okay. Right. So let's say, but okay, English literature, or for example, journalism, or Asian studies or history. I think what you need, and this should be a legal requirement, I would say, in Canada. I think this should be a federal law. I think the department has to state what the competences are you will gain before you enroll. That has to be defined. And then that has to be objectively measured with standardized testing. So, English literature, I prefer to, I was saying, journalism. So, because journalism, you could actually say, this is going to teach you and prepare you for a career in journalism. You're going to have this, and this competence. You know what I mean? Now, I don't know. Like with English literature, it's way more debatable because it's so broad. Probably that would be a huge fight within the department. The professors would have to sit down and discuss, what are we preparing students to do? Are we preparing them to be high school English teachers? Yeah. Maybe that has to be, maybe you have to split the department into two pieces. Maybe half of them are being prepared for, are we preparing them to write book reviews for the New York Times? Which is also a legit competence to confirm.
Well, there wasn't a journalism degree at University of Michigan, where I went to school. So, yeah.
But I mean, that first challenge is incredibly worthwhile, because believe me, I've been inside departments of anthropology where there is no agreement about what anthropology is, like what's the meaning of the term, what's the meaning of the, there's no agreement about what are the students supposed to be learning, what are the outcomes supposed to be, but then you have to measure, are we or are we not living up to those, are we getting those outcomes to students, are the students learning to be journalists as defined and itemized this way, as quantified in a measurable test, are they learning to speak Chinese, that one's real easy to quantify, because there's a very clear competence to measure, and so on.
Yeah, I think there should have been a survey of the students, like what are you planning on becoming? Are you planning on becoming a journalist? Are you planning on becoming an English teacher? Are you planning on becoming a professor? And actually seeing the results of 10 years down the line, like, do these people actually pursue this? Do they become this? And,
and maybe those need to be separate departments too, or separate programs for departments, separate specialization.
I think so. Yeah, I agree with that, because, it was just like, if you wanted to go into any of those fields, English, the program that I was in makes sense. Like that was what they had. Right.
So I looked at one with you.
And editing too. That's what a major place that I was, a major field or just a career path that I was looking into.
But maybe also there's training just to be an author yourself. Where you say, I want to be a novelist. You know what I mean? Maybe I want to be some kind of writer, whatever it is. Yeah. Maybe that also would be a separate stream with separate requirements or separate outcomes that they get measured. Yeah, I looked at a university program with you. I was almost looking at it as a joke. I already knew about it, but I showed it to you on the internet. Yeah. I looked at a university program in Buddhism where they stated what you were going to learn was to do pastoral care and funeral ceremonies. So this is preparing you for a career like a Buddhist monk or a Buddhist religious official of some kind. This is what you're going to do. So, talking to elderly people who are dying of incurable diseases and performing funeral ceremonies. Yeah. I'm not, but that is very different.
It's a very specific career that's, it's going to prepare you for that.
Right. But that may be irreconcilable with someone who's doing research on politics and history. I did research on slavery. Yeah. Like, okay, so I want to talk about the history of slavery within Buddhism and Buddhist monks making up excuses for slavers and that. This is a type of incisive research into the history of the religion, which is totally incompatible with a department where those are the expectations of the professors, of the students, or what have you. Yeah. But that already, like, something. I think certain types of services are inherently and ineluctably a scam because they are unclear about what the service is being offered. Yeah. If you don't have that fundamental clarity, if you you could show up and spend tens of thousands of dollars and they say, look, bro, we just train you to do funeral services here. You know what I mean? Or, look, bro, we don't teach you how to be a journalist here. We just talk to you about the professor's favorite poems. Look, bro, we don't actually teach the Chinese language. You just get to hear this useless set of lectures on some remote Polynesian islands, because that happens to be what the professor, did his thesis on. It's troubling. So,
yeah, just on that same note, I think that there should be like maybe at other universities there are, but there should be a pre-medicine degree, because
sure.
On one way, so in one way it allows you to have a degree in something completely unrelated, and you just do the requirements to get into medical school. But there are people that just want to become a doctor, and like they just want to do the classes that they need to do, but they have to take physics with engineers or people, or get a degree in biology when they really don't want to be a biologist. They want to, go pre-med and that kind of thing.
Well, if we don't have clarity on what the service is being offered, if we don't have clarity on the competence the student is supposed to develop, then we also can't hold the professors to account. We can't hold the assistant to account. Yeah. And vice versa, that would empower professors to hold students to account. To say, hey, look, you enrolled in this pre-med degree, so this is what or you enrolled in this, journalism degree, whatever it is, so this is what you got to be able to do. If you can't do that by year 2 or year 3 or something, you'd have whatever benchmarks, you better switch majors, because this is what we're here to learn. And if that's not what you're here to learn, get out. It could cut both ways.
Yeah, totally.
That's a wrap. The book is not a masterpiece. It is the product of writing by committee. I have done similar research where you start with social science statistics and then try to pull out interesting observations. I can sympathize with the challenge the authors had. That first chapter or 2 is well written, and then I feel the quality of writing falls apart. However, the book, imperfect though it is, will be remembered in the annals of history as a major landmark in philosophy of education. I think that's partly because it has an excellent survey of the literature. It discusses everything else that's been published before it in a very concise and coherent and useful way. And it brings empirical research methods to bear on one of the last sacred cows, one of the last areas that's been held behind a veil of inscrutability in Western culture. And it's a crucial area that impacts all of our lives, that has such significance economically, politically, philosophically, personally. It's a problem we all must solve. And until fundamentally we take it to Parliament, until we take it to the Senate, nothing is going to change. There's no way you can expect, the fox to mind the chickens. There's no way you can expect the professors to act against their own fundamental interests. There's no way you can expect a for-profit university, which is how they operate, even the ones that are not, in theory, on paper, are not.
Try to earn less money.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And that even comes down to these questions of 300 students in a classroom with one professor, the lecture format, the theater format, as opposed to other methods of education and learning. You can't teach guitar that way. You can't teach guitar with one professor and 300 students sitting in theater sitting. Maybe you can't teach Chinese that way. Maybe you can't teach, a whole bunch of different topics that way. You know what I mean? Yeah. There are all these fundamental questions of responsibility. But there are economic problems at the bottom of it.
And the one interesting part was saying that there are problems, but the system works. It is functioning. It's not a crisis.
Yes, right.
So I think maybe not until it is a crisis will reform happen, or until people treat it as a crisis.
You see how recklessly optimistic I am compared to her. I think that's the whole point of politics, is try to recognize and address problems before they become a crisis. And I, for one, if I'm elected, I'd sink my teeth into this issue and never let go. And when I was in Victoria, I didn't just take my complaint to the Ombudsman. I took it to Parliament.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
That's a story for another time.
À-bas-le-ciel.